to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host, Rob Sheply here. And on today's episode, we got special guest Michael McGruder. He's been with us past couple episodes, talk about Miami football. And dude, it's great to have you on again to talk Miami, talk Carson Beck, and the new defensive coordinator hire that they have.
Thanks for having me back. I always love talking about it. They can't seem to stay out of the news.
Yeah, that's what I mean with Miami. They're one of those teams where it's always something going on, right? Because now with the NFL draft, they're going to talk about Cam Ward possibly being the number one pick, and now they got Carson Beck, who's coming in, and according to On Three Sports, approximately $4.4 million is the NIL figure that's been kind of floating around. Which, if you look at that comparative to Bo Nix, for example, who was a first round pick with the Broncos, he's making more money staying in college for a sixth season than he would be in the NFL too. And not to mention too, with the whole elbow surgery and everything that he's having this season too, that's already going to mess with his draft stock and everything. So with that said, we have Carson Beck coming in to replace Cam Ward. What were your kind of general thoughts on it? And I guess most importantly too, how do you think Miami's offense is going to change from Cam Ward to now having Carson Beck?
Well, I think the biggest thing that Beck is going to bring to the University of Miami's football program here is experience. He played 27 plus games at Georgia. I think he lost three regular season games, something like that. So he brings a stabilizing force, especially after the fans saw Emory Williams in that bowl game, that second half. It certainly should help bring encouragement that the offense can not necessarily lose a huge step. It's tough to replace a guy like Cam Ward when you're replacing the potential number one pick. You're going to have a drop off, but at least it's not as big a drop off as it could be expected. I mean, again, you're bringing in a guy with 24-3, I believe, at Georgia, so he's played some big games against big time opponents. He's got the experience, and that's what that team needs right now. They don't have room for a freshman quarterback coming in. On top of that, I wouldn't turn down $4.4 million for just about anything to go play one more season of college football at my girlfriend's school. So, and we all know he's got that Lamborghini. He's going to blend in right on South Beach. So it's a perfect place for him. He saw what Cam Ward was able to do in one season of Miami, boost his draft stock from a zero-star prospect to the possible number one. And with his elbow surgery, he needed another chance to kind of audition for the pro scouts. My concern with his elbow is really going to be he might not be ready for spring practice, and so he's going to need to be able to build that rapport with his receivers and his timing with his receivers that he might not necessarily have as big a window as he would have liked.
That's the one thing too. I mean, say what you will about Miami and all that too, but Mario Cristobal is a phenomenal recruiter, and I think he's going to blend his message well. But even if he's not necessarily ready for spring ball, it's not necessarily the end of the world because hey, he can build rapport with the receivers that he has. He could start building rapport with the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach Shannon Dawson, which I believe he's going into his fourth season. I want to say question mark, but they're in a good spot right now, all things considered. And I think he fits the perfect mold in terms of what they're looking for. Because in some sense, too, right? Carson Beck has accomplished everything that he's really wanted to at Georgia. So this kind of seems like a win-win in the sense of hey, you go somewhere new. You know what his background is. I mean, number one ranked quarterback back in 2020, signed with the
Mhm.
Dogs, played with them for a number of seasons and did his thing. And now it's time for a new chapter too. And I guess it's worth mentioning too. It's definitely intriguing to see who some of his weapons are going to be in terms of the wide receiving core and everything too.
I mean, losing Xavier Restrepo, the number one receiver in Miami history, and that's a star-studded list. So to lose that is going to be a big hit, and so it'll be interesting who steps up. There are a lot of options, and it's South Florida. They're going to find kids everywhere, so it'll be interesting to see kind of how that proceeds. I know I believe Blake Martinez also or Damian Martinez, sorry, also declared for the draft. So you're down, you're starting running back, you're starting quarterback, your number one receiver. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what Shannon Dawson molds this offense into. You're also losing some of the athleticism that Cam Ward had. You're going to have kind of a much more stationary quarterback, so that it's more on the receivers to be able to get open through scheme rather than athleticism.
It's worth mentioning too. That's a great jumping off point that you mentioned too. I'm only speculating here, of course, but you have to imagine that part of the reason he's perhaps transferring from Georgia Miami is I think one, he's going to be taking a bigger step in terms of really being kind of the leader on this team and kind of just being depended upon more, because I think in Georgia it's a lot more of a balanced attack, whereas with Miami it's a lot more explosive, it's a lot more quarterback driven, and you have a lot more weapons at perhaps Miami than you would at Georgia, where for the most part a lot of those receivers, if you stick them and you're aggressive on them, they really didn't get as much separation as you would like. So it forced Beck to probably take a lot more hits than he probably should have at all.
Well, and now who's week one for Miami next year? Notre Dame, the same team that eliminated him when he didn't get to play. So it might be a little bit of a revenge game for him coming out, and also to show how that elbow's doing. And he chose a school with a good offensive line. I think that was an important decision for him, is that he came to a school where the offensive line has been there for 2 years now, really not losing very much, and you have potential top 5 pick in your tackles. And so that should help instill a little confidence in him that he can sit in that pocket and find some space to do some damage.
Especially too, you just mentioned it too. It's in many ways kind of redemption for Carson Beck, in the sense of, hey, you didn't get to play Notre Dame in the college football playoff, and you get to meet Notre Dame in the Catholic versus convicts rivalry that dates back all the way to the 1980s too. So for you to be in that position, have a full summer to really heal that elbow, be able to really go all in with that playbook too, and be able to meet all those receivers who are probably going to be coming in from the transfer portal, it's definitely an exciting time to be a Miami fan, and I'd probably argue that they should even be favored as in the ACC right now too.
I mean, they were favored at a certain point last year too, and we all saw how that defense let Cam Ward down. They wasted an amazing season from a quarterback, and you don't get those very often. And so I'm sure we're about to talk about it, but bringing a new defensive coordinator with a new scheme, and I don't want to say this is a trial period for Mario Cristobal, but you're on your third defensive coordinator, man. We got to start figuring something out, and it's not because they're getting better jobs. So it's time to start really, narrowing it down. I mean, Dabo Sweeney had Brett Venables for years, and the defense was consistent. Miami's looking for consistency on that side of the ball right now. He does an excellent job recruiting, but now it's time to start building that defense.
Yeah, which brings to our second talking point here. They fired Lance Gundry, who was there for 2 seasons, and now they bring in Corey Hetherman, who spent 1 season at Minnesota, did an excellent job there, and he is the part of the Greg Schiano tree. He was a linebackers coach with Rutgers for a number of seasons. Mario Cristobal has some history with the whole Schiano tree, so it makes sense that he would bring in someone like Corey Hetherman to come down to Miami and really revamp this defense. And the one intriguing stat that I also kind of found too is the only coach that's going to stay from the Gentry staff is Jason Taylor, who's going to be their defensive line coach. So, with that said, he just finished his first year, one of the top defenses in all of college football. They ranked top 10 nationally in total defense, passing defense, and also they held their opponents just 41.2% success rate on 4th down. So there's a number of reasons to be optimistic. So with that said, what were your kind of general thoughts on the hire? And most importantly, what changes do we have to see in order for Miami to really take that next step?
Well, I think a huge thing for Miami's intensity. And when you look at Heatherman in the face, he looks like an intense guy that's not going to take any excuses. He only demands effort. And that's what Miami has lacked at periods of time, and effort and just a focus on details. And so I think a big step for Miami is where he seems to be specializing is in that pass defense. He got carved up by Kyle McCord in a make or break game. They win that game, and they have a pretty good chance of making the college football playoff. And just destroyed by him. And it was heartbreaking to watch. And when your defense gives up 21 points or 21-point lead, it's just it kills you. And so it felt like a change was needed. Lance Guidry had not made the steps. It felt like he'd lost the defense at a certain point. And we saw that previous years. I think when North Carolina ran up 534 rushing yards in the last game of the season, I mean, guys stopped carrying. And that's kind of where it felt like one or two guys were carrying. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets the buy-in from the rest of the defense. And I mean, you're coming in with Ruben Bain, who was a freshman All-American. He was a little hurt last year, so we're hoping for more of a consistent and healthy season from him because he can be a game changer. He can be a game plan wrecker coming off that edge. But really, it's going to be a secondary that needs help. And they've brought in a couple of different transfers to kind of try to fix and patch some holes. And we'll see how his scheme works there. But like you said, Minnesota's defense was third or fourth in the Big Ten. I think the only teams ahead of them are playoff teams not Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Indiana. So I think that is going to play a huge factor. Is this guy has a track record of success at a major college conference, and we'll see how he fares now in the ACC.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention too. I mean, like I said, he has the linebacking background. So, like you said too, I think we both agree that the secondary is the biggest problem. So I am kind of curious who he brings in terms of his staff too, in terms of somebody who has that Power Four experience in coaching the secondary, because especially it was those big explosive plays that ultimately ended up making the difference between them winning games and them losing those games, such as the Syracuse game that you brought up, for example, too. And I guess too, the other thing that's worth mentioning too is Miami has more pieces to work with on defense than you would think, in the sense of they do have a number of players coming back for their junior or senior year. So it's not necessarily like they're starting from ground zero, but also they probably are going to bring in some guys potentially from Minnesota and Rutgers to help out with that staff and possibly be able to come in and recruit as well, because I don't think they're necessarily pigeonholed in the state of Florida now as much as they would be before if they kept Lance for another season too.
I mean, yeah, the temptation when you come to the University of Miami is the idea that you get to recruit South Florida and you're in their backyard. You can see them every day. That worked in the 80s, but now other teams are starting to swoop in. And when you have Georgia right there also recruiting the same area, it's not that hard for them to get down there. You are facing a lot more competition than you used to. And so the idea that you can monopolize that space is almost gone. I mean, it's going to be tough. And so it's not necessarily a more national program, but how are you going to sell these kids to stay home when you've had 2 seasons of great success in the last 20 years? One 2017 and last year versus Georgia, who's won 2 national championships. LSU is right over there. Alabama's still right there. There are a lot of programs. Florida State and Florida are also in-state programs. UCF is on the rise. So it's a lot more competitive than it used to be. And it's going to be, how do you sell these kids on this program? And how do you develop what's already there to show that, hey, this is a good place to be. Stay home. Make Miami great again.
Exactly, because now we live in such a, I guess, plug and play college football, in the sense of coaches don't have as much time to be able to develop some of these players as they used to. So in many ways, it's kind of like the NFL in a sense, where you're sort of gambling on a certain player based on X, Y, and Z, and then you kind of hope that they fit in, and it kind of just figures it out for itself.
Well, and these kids are, you're recruiting them starting at 16. Really, it's probably younger, let's be honest.
Yeah,
But real serious recruiting starting at 16. And who they are at 16 is not who they're going to be at 18, who they're going to be at 20. But between the smaller chance you have to recruit a player before the transfer portal can take over and they can leave to go to a program where, hey, I can play here. And your coaching contract, it's never been harder to be a head coach in college football than today, because every school wants immediate results. Look at Auburn. They'll fire a coach every year if they have to, if they think it'll make them better.
exactly. And it's just one of those things too, where now you just see just such extraordinary buyouts for everything too. Like, for example, for Miami to hire Corey Hetherman, Minnesota was ready to offer him a big contract extension, and he was getting paid more than $1 million a year. And Miami had to buy out his contract in order for him to even come over here. So nowadays, it's not only are you going and poaching these coaches and poaching these players, but more often than not, you're paying a fee on top of it too. So, I mean, I'm definitely intrigued to kind of see how Miami's defense changes from here. And, for anyone who's watched Minnesota football, particularly in the Big Ten, they're definitely been one of the most underrated teams in the entire country, and probably a team that nobody really is going to talk about too much, just because of they're just kind of stacked right in the middle, in terms of they're not in the upper echelon of the Big Ten, but they're also not the laughing stock like the Northwesterns or the Purdue's of the world either. So it's hard to find that balance.
Oh, absolutely. I believe they finished last year 5-4 in the conference. But if I recall correctly, they didn't allow more than 27 points. Oh, they allowed 31 points to Iowa. And that was the most points you allowed all season. Usually it was around 17 to 23 points. You can work with that. In today's day and age where best athlete wins the majority of the time, you're not going to have these 12-point scoring average. That's just not how it works anymore. And so, 17 to 23, that's a fine range. You're happy with that. So it'll be interesting to see kind of in his 1 year there, how does he do in his first year here?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Michael, I appreciate you coming on and being generous with your time and sharing your thoughts on Miami. And I think we can all agree that they're definitely on the rise and intrigued to see where they go from here.
Yeah, man, it's going to be an exciting year next year, but I've said that every year. They're
That's
a great paper team, and now let's see results.